Hi, welcome to Crochet Witchcraft, where we take some yarn and with a wave of our wands, or crochet hook, we make something magical. My name is Sarah, and I am so happy you could join me today. Get hooked on the rest of my crochet journey by clicking the subscribe button and clicking the notification bell so you know when I next upload a video. My Etsy links and Instagram page are also linked in the description box down below. Let's get started. Crochet Witchcraft is a channel dedicated to sharing my love of crochet, teaching friends and family the basics, and to learn from you as well. In my last video, I talked about some of the things that I love about crochet and how I got started. If you missed that video, check it out by clicking the iCard up here. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the more frustrating sides of crochet. I don't want to say the things I hate about crochet because hate is a really strong word, but these are things that certainly make me sometimes want to just throw in the towel. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is the money side of things. It can get really expensive. I mentioned in my last video that I like that crochet is a hobby that doesn't require a bunch of accessories at the beginning, and it's relatively inexpensive to start. However, once you use up the yarn, you want it to stay with that project. So in order to keep crocheting, you do need to continually be buying yarn. And while there is some really amazing, cheaper yarn options out there, I'll make another video about some of my favorite starter yarns. There are some really, really amazing yarns that are a little bit more expensive. I end up getting most of my yarn at Joann's just because I'm on a budget. Sometimes I'll go to Michael's as well, but I really, really want to be able to support my local yarn shops more often. The only problem is a lot of locally owned yarn shops tend to carry some of your more luxury style yarn, and so it can be a little bit more expensive. The other thing that plays a factor in how much money it takes to crochet is what you're crocheting. If you're crocheting things that are smaller, like hats, scarves, baby blankets, mittens, gloves, amigurumi, things that don't take up a lot of yarn cost less to make as a generalization compared to things that are larger. So one of the things that I've been getting really into lately is making sweaters, but it takes about 1,000 yards of a worsted normal weight yarn to make a sweater for myself, and that can be several balls of yarn. I have made sweaters where the yarn cost me $25, but I also have yarn ready to make a sweater that cost nearly $100 and it was on sale. Sometimes it's just I wish I had all of the money in the world. The other thing where money can come into play are the accessories. I'll make a whole video about some of the optional accessories for crochet because there are a lot. At the end of the day, all you really need are yarn, a hook, scissors, and a needle for sewing in your ends. All of the other things are completely optional, and even though some of them do make your life a little bit easier, ultimately those are the main things. So I want to talk about the hooks. You buy them from the store. They're usually made of like a metal, like aluminum or plastic. There are some available that are made from wood, but there are also some kind of luxury crochet hooks that you can find online. There are some gorgeous handmade crochet hooks that people are making out of locally sourced wood. There's a website called furlscrochet.com, and they have some of the most stunning, I'm gonna throw up a picture, stunning crochet hooks made from a variety of different woods. They will mix in with some acrylic. I will go on that website and drool over their hooks for an hour, but I cannot justify personally spending that much money on a crochet hook. I think it's beautiful. If I ever make money from YouTube, that's the first thing I'm gonna go buy. So I think with crochet, especially with the yarn and the hooks, it's really easy to start off with the basics and then kind of slowly work your way up to wanting some of the more luxury items. The second thing that I hate about crochet is just not necessarily having all of the time in the world to crochet. One of the frustrating things about crochet is that some projects take longer than others. And that makes sense. That's true for any hobby. Some projects might only take a day, some might take a week, some might take multiple months, some might take even longer. The project that took me the longest was my 2019 temperature blanket. That took me a period of about 14 months start to finish, but part of that was waiting for all of the data to come in. Every row represented a different day's temperature, and so I had to wait for that data to come in before I was able to finish. So I wasn't able to have the chance to finish the blanket until I had all of the data from December 2019. At that point, I was also working on a few other things, but some of the other projects that have taken me a long time are kind of full-sized blankets, things where there's just a lot of stitches involved. But the other projects that tend to take me a really long time are patterns that use really, really thin yarn. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous yarn from Red Heart. It's called It's a Wrap. And I'm trying to see if I can show you how thin this is. Here we go. And this yarn is a 4-ply, meaning it's composed of 4 strands that kind of run together. And they aren't really twisted together. They kind of just run together. And as the ball goes on, those individual plies, those individual strands, will change color to create this gradient. But this is how thin this yarn is. And partially because it's made up of a multi-ply yarn that isn't twisted. The other thing is just because it is so thin, it can be really difficult to work with. Sometimes it's easy for the hook to kind of slip between these plies to not pick all of them up. I just have to really focus. The stitches will end up being tiny. This is the kind of yarn where a project is going to take me a really long time, but it does create really, really beautiful projects. On the other hand, something that's going to take me a relatively short period of time to crochet with is something like the Bernat baby blanket that is a really, really thick strand. So this is a polyester, that it is relatively thick. So you don't have to worry about having multiple strands, multiple plies. This yarn is going to be relatively thick. It's, about maybe half the size of my finger. And I can crochet a ball of this into, whatever project I'm working on in really just like an hour or two. I can go through these like nobody's business, whereas that really thin yarn will take me days, if not weeks. So the length of time it takes to do a project depends on the type of yarn you're using. It also depends on the pattern you're doing. So I am a big fan of creating things that look more complicated than they actually are. But I also really like learning new patterns. As I mentioned in my first video, it's really easy to go from basic to advanced in crochet because every crochet stitch and pattern is going to be based off of the same couple simple moves. So it's really easy to take what you know and apply it to something that might just be slightly more complicated than what you've done before. But when you learn new patterns, sometimes that requires a little bit more focus, and the more focus that is required, often the faster I kind of get tired and I need to switch to something else. So as far as time, that's kind of the other thing. Another thing I find frustrating with crochet is frogging. So frogging is the term that we use to rip out crochet stitches. So it could be just a couple stitches. If you realize that you made a mistake, you could rip out a row or two, or you could frog an entire project. So I actually decided to film this video today because I started making a dishcloth. I like my dishcloths a little bit on the smaller side. I actually have a few patterns coming for you guys in a couple weeks, but I started making this one and then realized that it was just slightly too narrow than what I prefer. So I decided I have to frog it. The way to frog with crochet to take out stitches is actually pretty easy. All you do is you take the yarn dangling off of your project from your most recent stitch and you just pull. Although I will say that it is satisfying to frog this final chain. Basically, you just want to hold really tight to the end and you just pull, 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 and then your last slip stitch, and now you have a fully reusable set of yarn. I will all that up later. So frogging, while it can be a little bit satisfying and it doesn't take a lot of brain power, it is just frustrating to have put time into something and then realize that it didn't work out and you have to start all over. Now, you just saw with that white dishcloth that frogging is actually not too terrible for the most part. An exception will be any kind of yarn that has any kind of pieces sticking on the outsides. So a good example of that would be my rainbow shawl here. I love this. I just made it last week. And this yarn I picked up off the shelf because it's just kind of so soft and snuggly. And this color I just knew was going to be so bright and happy and fun, especially as we get into the warmer summer months. So what I ended up making with it is just a super long, almost like jumbo scarf style that I can just very easily wrap myself in and feel nice and cozy on my shoulders. So anyway, with this yarn, originally I wanted to make a triangle shawl. I found a pattern, I got about halfway through it, and I just didn't like it. It wasn't really the right size that I was looking for, even though I had checked my gauge, and ultimately I didn't like it. So I decided I had to frog the entire thing and just start completely over. Frustrating. What made that more difficult is that this yarn, and I don't know if you can see, is kind of fuzzy. So there's all these little bits and pieces that kind of stick out from the main strand. And so this yarn felts together really easily. If you think about, you have two pieces of yarn that all have these little pieces sticking out next to each other. It's almost like Velcro. They'll kind of stick together and then they won't really want to come apart. That's kind of what can happen with yarn like this. So instead of pulling really smoothly out, what will happen is those pieces will kind of get stuck together and they'll end up knotting with the stitches around them. And then you have to go in there, figure out where those two pieces are kind of attached, and either gently pry them apart or use embroidery scissors to snip, just where they're kind of connected. Luckily, I was able to sit there with my embroidery scissors and I was able to get all of that yarn to a point where I could reuse it, but it did take probably an hour to frog that whole thing. Now, I'm grateful that I did because I absolutely love the result. So yeah, frogging. If there was anything on this list that I would have to say that I hated most, it probably is crochet cramps. Now, crochet cramps is just the generalized term that we use to describe any pain that happens as a result of crocheting for too long. So this can be things like having pain in your neck, in your shoulder, in your back, in your arms. It can be in your hands, either hand. I'm right-handed, so most of my crochet cramps tend to happen on my right side. I find it a lot in my neck and my shoulder. I also find that I can get it in my hands sometimes. Now, on the whole, crochet cramps are relatively easy to deal with. You just have to take a break from crocheting. But it can be really frustrating if you are just super focused and excited and enthusiastic about a project to step away from it. It can also be difficult if you are making that project for a specific person, time, deadline, etc. Just because you don't want to walk away. You have that time to work, you want to be crocheting. And so there are a few different things that you can do. There's like some simple stretches, things like that. Taking breaks, always a good thing. One of the things that I do is have multiple projects going at once. So one of the things that I notice that I get crochet cramps most often is if I'm working with a thinner hook. So if I'm working with some of those smaller yarns, those projects that take me a really long time, I cannot work on that project alone. I like to have other projects that have bulkier yarn and larger hook sizes, just so that my hand is not constantly having to be held in a kind of more closed fist, that I will be able to relax those muscles a little bit. I can still crochet, I can still be getting that creative outlet or that relaxing time if that's what I need, but I give my hand a chance to relax. So I'll work on my project, that uses the small hook size for a period of time, and then if I'm smart, before my hand starts to hurt, I'll put it down and I'll switch over to a larger hook size and that project. But crochet cramps are definitely a real thing, and I do not like them. The last thing that I want to talk about today that can be frustrating with crochet is comparing yourself to other makers. Now, I mentioned in my last video that there is a massively supportive maker community online that I have found, particularly on Instagram. However, it can be really hard to watch those very successful people, many of whom who have turned this into their full-time job, and are putting out new designs, new patterns all the time. Some of them are putting out full collections. Some of them are doing collaborations with these amazing brands. Some of them are going on trips and speaking and teaching classes. And it can be hard not to compare your progress to those people. However, one of the things that I've learned to manage with that is that this isn't my full-time job. I am a hobby crocheter. I am still new at this. I have a full-time job. I cannot crochet all day. I have other responsibilities. So one of the things that I think that it's important to be mindful of, especially if you're someone who falls into that trap of comparing yourself to other people, is every one of us is on our own crafting journey, and we can't compare ourselves to each other. I think the only thing that we can do is learn from each other. So one of the things that I do if I'm comparing myself to someone is thinking, oh, that person really figured out what they love to crochet. I still need to figure that out. So instead of going, oh, they're better than me because they figured it out, it's just acknowledging that I'm not there yet. I'm a baby crocheter. I am still new. I don't know everything that there is, and I'm still learning and exploring, and I want to enjoy the stage I'm in right now. So wherever you are on your crafting journey, stop it. Don't compare yourself to other people. You are on your own journey, and you are going to make amazing things. So that's it for today. Let me know what you hate about crochet, or at least find incredibly frustrating. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.